Welcome to the Wolf and Bull podcast. I am your friendly neighborhood host, The Wolf, and with me I have my illustrious co-host,
The Bull is here.
And we are finally back. It has been quite some time since we had our last episode. There's been a lot of life trauma, Beowulf and I have adopted a hyena. That is now living with us, a small Aussie doodle. So I'm running on 3 hours of sleep. It's really great. Bull, what's new with you?
Well, apparently you're just adding to the menagerie, right? We're not.
Yes.
We're cutting down on that. We have the youngest daughter that moved out, so that's traumatic for at least one of us parents. I'm not going to tell you which, but all is good. All is good. We're back in the saddle again. We've got some great content coming your way, especially today.
Yes, we do. And just before we hop into that content, if you're looking for a podcast that is about captive conversation, captivating conversation, business insight, fresh and new ideas, then you have come to the right place. And if you'd like to become a part of the Wolf and Bull family, you can find us on Instagram at thewolfandbull.com, at the Wolf and Bull. It'll be somewhere around here on the screen. And additionally, you can find us on YouTube at the Wolf and Bull as well. Now, because we've dealt with so much trauma over the last few months, we have decided
to have on a very special.
It is a therapy session. We've decided to have on a very special guest. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce this very special guest and friend of the show, host of the podcast, Relationships and Relationshits. Welcome to the show, Jason Green.
It's fantastic to have you aboard. Absolutely. And, with the title of a podcast like that, there's going to be some interesting conversation, I think.
So can you give me the little background, a quick run through of how you came up with that name? Because I love that name.
It started originally, I really had no plan of doing a podcast. I was just doing stuff on TikTok, and it kind of blew up a little bit. But people were wanting more information. And so I was like, I need to put on a podcast. And so I'm always talking about the good and bad. And so I was like, I need the word relationships just so I can at least have a good search, for podcast world. And so then I was like, I need something that's bad, since I'm talking about good and bad. And I don't know, it just kind of popped in my head. And then I asked everybody, and that's like, everybody is always like, that's a great title. And it's worked out. So
I thought maybe you discovered that after a bad evening out at a Thai food or an Indian food restaurant or something. I'm not sure what. Yeah, I should not do that while you're drinking, huh, Wolfie?
It's okay.
You expect it of me. There's got to be a few of them I throw in there, right?
I've got desensitized to your dad jokes. So it just kind of rolls off my back. But that was a good one. I like that one. A little golf clap for that. But yeah, Jason, it's been a while since we talked with you. Last time we saw you was at there's a podcast convention.
Yeah, podcast movements. I think
it was. Podcast movement. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've learned over the last few months, and forgive me for saying this, but I've learned over the last few months that conventions are just a giant weenie rub. Everyone is rubbing weenies, and it's really great, and it's good, and we meet wonderful people like yourself. So that's what's awesome about it. On top of that, we have also.
I think you
really thought that this episode was going to be a really, really good one. So based on the last conversation, it sounds like you've been really busy. You've been managing your podcast, Relationships and Relationshits, and you've been working on your own dating app.
I actually didn't start the dating app, but I was in a relationship. It ended, and I was probably like a month or two went by, and I was like, I need to go out and start again, basically. And so there's an event going on, and I went to the singles event, and the person had a little bit of technical issues when they're supposed to switch out people to talk to, like speed dating. And the woman I was talking to at the time, I was like, hey, is this guy doing this all by himself? She's like, yeah, this is the second time I've been to an event, and, he's doing everything. So I was like, I wonder if he needs help. And I had this background with the military of planning events and stuff like that. And so I was like, I'm going to see if this guy has any interest, since I kind of, at that point, I've been dabbling in the relationship world for a while. And so I messaged him, and I was like, hey, do you need any help with this? And I let him know my background. He's like, yes, I'm a one-man show. He had a partner before. And so I was like, okay, let me do this. And so we actually met on Valentine's Day at Starbucks. So, so that was my Valentine's date. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And so I was like, hey, here's a little bit about me. And he's like, all right, let's do this. Let's partner up. And the app was already built, luckily for me. He had already done all the funding and all that. Gotcha. But like anything, there's always tweaks to be made, and that's what we're kind of going through right now. But as you kind of streamline everything, to make everything, it's where, we need to be. Everybody wants, of course, to get on there quick and have everything ready quick. So I started working with him, and I was like, I'll handle all the social media, the marketing and stuff like that. You just help get the events going, and you worry about the tech part. And so that's kind of where it started.
It seems to me, luckily, I'm of a generation where we didn't have, swipe this, swipe that, and all those kinds of things that are out there. So I'm not very adept at understanding, excuse me, all those things. But at the local bar or the church or anywhere in between is where you kind of met people and actually conversed in front of them, et cetera. And I'm not denigrating the generational changes that are in place now. As a matter of fact, it makes things much more efficient in a lot of ways, but differentiating between platform and platform is what I wonder, because there's a handful of them out there, right? And some of them have a lot of traction, and a lot of it's just marketing and probably TikTok marketing and things like that really attract a certain crowd. And, if there was a picture of me on one of those, it would not be the same view you're seeing right now. On the screen, it would be something a little more, probably a little less gray in the beard, a lot more hair on the head, perhaps. But what kind of things differentiate this platforms from some of the others out there?
Well, that's what actually drew me was the difference, because when I first heard that he had a dating app, I hadn't even looked at it when I went to the event. I was more about in person at that moment, but and then I downloaded after it. And the thing is with this one is it's your friends are actually picking for you, so it's more like a team effort. And because sometimes your friends know better than you do. You might be picking that same bad person, and so they're helping you.
Or you find out who's your real friend and who's not your real friend, right?
So, and you can have the way this started. Actually, Steven is the one who created the app. His mother-in-law, 'cause he's actually married with children, but his mother-in-law said, "I wish there was an app where we could help our sons and daughters find, a partner." Which, of course, I don't think many people are going to use it for that, but that's how the idea at least sparked. And that was a few years back, and so he basically, you can have your entire community. So it's not just one person helping you. You can have 30 people helping you if you want. If you really want your mom to help you, you can. But most times it's going to be your friends that are going to help you, that know what you probably need more than sometimes you know what you need. And so that's kind of the start of that. It's like a community helping somebody. And you can do also for yourself. And you don't have to be, so you could actually, with both of you being married, right, you can actually go on there and help somebody else do that too. So there's an option where you're just helping the other person. So
it's like an online, it's like the perfect online wingman, basically.
Well, I was just going to say, us old married guys can live vicariously through their friends that are youthful and doing all these online dating things, right? That's
exactly.
But that's very interesting differentiator, because I don't think I've ever heard of that before. It's almost its own social media platform itself, right? In a kind of a way, a quasi.
Yeah,
right?
And we have other bigger ideas, of course, too. But first, we're just, of course, trying to grow the audience. But that's why I said I was drawn to it. I was like, oh, this is different, because my first thought was like, oh, another dating app. Because honestly, they come out so often. Probably every day is a new dating app, for every little vice that person has. But so I was like, oh, this is something I had never experienced, and most people thought it was a good idea, And so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna work with this guy and see where it goes.
You know what, Jason, that's really interesting, because you're going to have a much wider audience than just the people trying to date each other, right? I mean, that's going to be the central focus, of course. That's the kind of the norm. But if it's about kind of collecting, okay, there's, Joe Blow trying to get on there and do the dating thing, and I'm his friend, and Cameron his friend, and he's got 12 others. All of us can participate in that. So I assume that's all of us would have a subscription of some sort. Right?
Correct. Yeah, you all have subscription. It's all free. And like I said, you're all putting in a group effort to basically set somebody up. And the way it works, too, is if you were to set somebody up, the other person has to, of course, swipe right on that person also. So then they're called the seekers, the people that are helping bring the people together. But so, if I saw somebody in your family and you saw somebody in my family, then we would connect like, hey, I want to set these two people up. And so one that also helps kind of limit, unfortunately with dating apps, there are a lot of fake profiles out there, and scams to get you to go wherever they want you to go. And so this kind of minimizes it.
So I got to ask you, when you just said that, I just kind of chuckled to myself. I don't know if the person that put this together, I'm sorry, you mentioned his name, Steven. Yeah, Steven, was it? Is he a Harry Potter fan and using seekers and keepers and things
he's never mentioned Harry Potter. I don't know where the name came from, but I'm going to have to ask him that now. I'm going to see him a little bit.
Wow.
Well, I mean, everybody wants to find the Well, I'm going to leave that,
That was
on the sideline. I'm going to leave.
Yeah,
that
come
particular.
on. This is professional. Okay, we're very professional here on the Wolf and Bull.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, I think that's kind of a really good theme to jump into there, Chris, because it's the holidays, almost Halloween, you know, the most important holiday in all of the year. So that's good. You mentioned Harry Potter, but yeah, that's really cool. Now, I didn't catch it. Did you say the name at all? For our listeners, we can have a little app icon and the name come across.
So on social media, it's Get Blinda, BLINDA, but it's the actual app is Blinda, BLIND apostrophe, like blind date. Okay. And so that's kind of where it came from.
Very cool.
But, yeah, so it's kind of a blind date mentality.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's interesting how things kind of aligned there. I think that's really cool that you're managing that and helping that grow, because it sounds like it's something that's a lot better than Bumble and you know, Grindr and all the two Christian Mingle.
There's a whole bunch of ones you've never even. I mean, I saw a ad somewhere for something about farmers.
Oh, farmersonly.com
or something.
Farmers Only.
You know? Yeah. Farmers.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe it was like an SNL skit until they were getting serious about it. I'm like, oh, okay, it's kind of it certainly gets your attention.
Yeah,
right?
when I first saw that commercial for that, I agree. It looked very like someone just did an SNL skit. I saw it in Kansas, and I just assumed it was like a Kansas thing. And then I moved to Texas. I saw Texas, like, okay, maybe this is a whole thing. So I actually. One of my friends wanted to see what it's about. He's like, I'm curious what it looks like, but he was married. I was like, I'll get on there. I'm single at that moment. I got on there, and it was a lot of farm women. So, but I don't know if it's still around now. But yeah, I mean, there's something for everybody.
Yeah, I don't know either. I haven't seen their commercials in years. So maybe they realized that the pool of farmers looking to date each other is not as big as they thought. Because I have not seen a commercial in years. Same with Christian Mingle. I kind of went, you know, up and then down. But who knows? Maybe it's big again. But yeah, let's jump into your background when it comes to relationship attachments, and specifically, you know, maybe if there's relationship studies there. I know that, you know, on your podcast, you cover the secure attachment style, the preoccupied attachment style, the dismissive avoidant attachment style, and the fearful avoidant attachment style. For those in our audience who don't really know what those might be, could you give a little overview of what those are, and then as a tandem, how you think that, from your experience, something like Blinda might help with those type of situations in people's lives, because there's positives and negatives.
For anyone who doesn't know what attachment styles are, it's basically your relationship with your parents or caretakers, whoever's taking care of you as a child. Really, like in those first 5 years is really important. That relationship is going to have effect on you and your relationships as an adult. And a lot in romantic, but it's also workplace and just regular relationships. And so there's four attachment styles, 3 major and 1 minor. And so we have the secure attachment style, and that person usually had a pretty good upbringing. Their parents were allowed them to be, you know, be emotional, express their feelings. You know, they felt safe around their parents. Because attachment styles, it's really about security, and so they usually had a good upbringing for the most part. Because of that, they tend to be better in relationships. They tend to communicate well. They don't really get worked up, you know, in an argument, stuff like that. They're really easygoing type people for the most part. Doesn't mean they're not perfect, you know, no one is. And but they're usually the person that gets in a relationship early on, stays in a relationship for long periods of time. And if the ones that are single, they tend to not date frequently. They're going to be a one-person type relationship. And so also point out before I get into the other ones, it's a spectrum. So you're not one type of attachment style. You have a percentage of all of them, but you're going to usually be stronger at one. And so even though you're secure, you're going to have some of the little bit of the other stuff. But so the next one would be that's the secure attachments. Now we're going to talk about the insecure attachments. And we have the preoccupied anxious attachment style, also just called anxious attachment style. And it's similar to anxiety and being anxious. That person usually as a child has some type of inconsistency in their childhood, or perceived inconsistency. Sometimes it's not really there, but you think it is. And so it may be like examples would be, maybe you have a single parent. So maybe mom's working 3 jobs, and so you're kind of the latchkey kid in the 80s, you know, the Gen X kids, we had the latchkey families, you know, or you had every relative, every babysitter taking care of you. So you had different parenting styles. And so mom's so busy just trying to put food on the table and pay rent that she may not be around for all the things that you need her for, you know, and so you get a little bit of inconsistency. It's not bad parenting, it's just inconsistent parenting. And so with that person, they tend to grow up, and these are the people that they want to be around their partner like 24/7. They don't see why you need space from them. They tend to be the more affection type, and they're also the ones that's going to blame themselves for anything goes wrong. They're a lot of times going to stick in relationships longer than they should because they're afraid of being alone. They have trouble being alone. And they also tend to jump in new relationships pretty quick because they don't like being alone. They don't like that feeling. And so they use their partner to self-soothe. They're not usually really good with soothing themselves. And so yeah, they put a lot of focus on their partner. And so, yeah, that's the anxious person. So then the next one would be the dismissive avoidant attachment style. That person usually as a child had they usually have one avoidant parent. And that parent usually gave them not much for emotions, not much for security. So, and sometimes even punished that child if they were seeking some type of comfort or security, And so they've learned to be independent because of this. So you have, this happens as a baby. You can have a 2-year-old who's learning to be independent at that age. Of course, they're not really independent, but they've learned, like, I can't trust that parent to give me that emotional need I need. And so what happens, they become these adults who don't need people, and they are very independent. A lot of times they're really good, like entrepreneurs and stuff like that. And they just don't need people. They've learned how to figure it out on their own. So therefore, they don't see why even their partner needs to talk and communicate. And so they're usually not really good with communication. They tend to be in and out of relationships frequently because what happens is like anything, we all have our needs, right? And they get in a relationship and then things get more serious over time. And that's when their attachment system and their brain just says, this doesn't feel right. I've got to protect myself. And so then that's when they push you away. And what they call these deactivating strategies, anything that's really going to push you away. So then they'll push you away. You get that space, whether it's physical or just mental. And then they come back, they leave again and come back. And so you have a lot of back and forth. And so that's a dismissive avoidant. Then we have the last group, which is the minor group, but the most complex one is the fearful avoidant. Now this has 3 different names just to confuse people. It's fearful avoidant. Sometimes you'll hear is disorganized attachment. Sometimes you'll hear anxious avoidant attachment style. So they pull from anxious and avoidant. And so they're going to fluctuate. They're usually a child that had chaos in their life, like any type of abuse, maybe foster care, adoption. I like to use everyday example now, like just the kids in Ukraine. They have chaotic lives. Dad's going away to war. So they might have seen some horrible things, bombs blowing up. That's going to create a lot of chaos, which is probably going to create a lot of fearful, avoidant kids. But they only represent like 3 to 5% of the population. And that's the one I always recommend. If anyone's going to get therapy, it should be the fearful avoidance because they're super complex. They don't fit patterns as much as the other ones. I said they dabble kind of both sides. And so, yeah, those are the 4 attachment styles.
Well, you said that last one was 3 to 5%. Right. Of the population, and it's funny because number one, what I hear from you is that we are all on the spectrum, right? That it's kind of a saying these days, but this is a different version of that. But the funny part about this is it's not funny, I guess, but the funny part about this, funny, haha, or funny, strange, really, is that the ones that are supposedly most secure. Generally, and this is just my life experience, they never end up with the same. They end up with one of the anxious or one of the, therapy, 3 to 5% for some reason, which is, it's kind of strange, but just off the top of my head, I was wondering if you guys are trying to develop some kind of way to do, a quick survey to help your platform categorize these people, to help them stay away from problems, or maybe help, because you know how it is. It's
guide them in ways where it's not explosive.
Part of the personality groupings of these people that are probably the most stable, they're also the ones that try to fix everybody else, right? And so you never end up with the person you probably should. You end up with somebody you try to fix the whole time.
As far as the combinations of how these people get together, so the secure people, they represent about 50% of the population, but in the dating world, once you get about 30 years old, they only represent like 15 to 20% of the population because, like I said, they get in these long relationships. Secure is my strongest attachment. I was married for 15 years, and then I took a long break, didn't date very infrequently, And that's kind of the typical secure person. But a secure person is going to come across as boring usually to the other people. And I always tell people, I warn them that, because I'm like, you might have actually met a secure person, might have been a good match for you, but they didn't trigger your attachment system, which is because so an anxious person's used to inconsistency. Well, that secure person is going to give you consistency. And so you're like, oh, this doesn't really trigger my brain. Yeah. This is boring. Instead of maybe giving it a couple more dates, like, oh, this person's actually, I can trust this person. They're really good to me, but hey, this person here that seems like a bad boy, or, the bad girl, whatever. Like, that's fun.
Exactly.
It's like, it is fun. 3 months down the road, though, it may not be fun. And then you're like,
Jason, I've got a question for you, because when I took the test, obviously, and I don't know if you've heard it on some of the other episodes we've had, Bull obviously knows this. I don't come from a very good background, so that's saying things a little lightly. The interesting thing is, when I took the test, and I kid you not, I did get secure. When I took it, I was as honest as possible, and I thought there were some instances where there was a question that was asked, and I was kind of like, if I answer strongly, doesn't that mean I'm overcompensating type thing? So maybe I outwitted the test. I don't know. But I thought I would have been like dismissive or maybe fearful avoidant, but instead I got secure. Is it possible for people as they get older to move towards a more stabilized attachment
there was actually
style?
A study done over 4 years, and it showed that 25% of people actually change attachment style. So you're going to change somewhat over time, of course, based on your circumstance. The test it's a written test. It's subjective, because we're evaluating the brain. You can't really, it's not very black and white, right? When we're dealing with the brain. And so I always tell people, you got to be honest when you answer that, of course. But, you can have two kids who say had a horrible childhood, and one can be anxious, one could be avoidant, and they can still have somewhat of secure qualities. But over time, whatever happened in your life, you've moved towards more secure, you escaped whatever that environment was. And so you can develop, and it's based on things that you do, to improve yourself. And sometimes it's self-help, sometimes it's therapy, sometimes it's your partner. Maybe you have a partner who's great and helps you, become more secure, because a lot of that is relationship with the person too, because your partner is going to make or break you a lot of times. If you choose the right partner, you're going to become naturally more secure if you guys gel well, right? You still have issues, because that's normal, but so you could become more secure based on whatever you're doing, to make yourself more secure.
I think if I remember correctly on the test, a lot of those questions have a preface that basically says, I'm paraphrasing this, but it basically says to answer it as if that, like your parent is still alive, or you answer it as if you were still in that relationship as a child, or those kinds of things, to try to give you that, because we all get a different viewpoint through hindsight, right? And as we change or develop our own emotional stability or instability, that changes our points of view on what has happened to us historically. So I would not have guessed. I would guess you're right now, Wolf. I would have guessed your situation is stable. You're having adapted and all that kind of thing. And I give credit to a member of my immediate family in helping that out. But having said that, I would not have seen you overall as that. I would have picked up on, I forget which.
I would have thought dismissive.
Yeah, that's what I would have guessed.
Dismissive. Well, what's interesting, and obviously I think hindsight's 2020, as you were saying. I think obviously, life experience has probably played into things. I had instances, even though I did have parts of my life that were really, really bad, I had instances shortly after those parts where people came in, operated in the immortal words of Dominic Toretto as family, and really gave me insight into how it is appropriate and how it's functional to exist amongst people that are within your for lack of a better term, nuclear family or sphere of influence. So I think that kind of played into it, but I definitely think that's really interesting. This kind of, to me, listening to you talk about this stuff is really reminiscent to nature versus nurture in some ways. And I feel like this kind of ties specifically to the nurture aspect of things. On that note, can you maybe in your own words or your own opinion, for our listeners, kind of explain why understanding your personal attachment style and maybe not necessarily working on it, but being aware of it might be vitally important?
Yeah, it's like I said earlier, it's really for all kinds of relationships. So I focus more on romantic, but yeah, just being aware. So for me, like I'm currently single, so I know if I'm dating in the dating world, I depend on my partner. So if I'm dating somebody, a woman who's say anxious, I know that, okay, I need to make sure that I text pretty frequent, or not text frequently, but like respond quickly. She's going to want to be around me a lot more than like say an avoidant person. Like avoidant person, like, okay, I know I need to have space for this person, so that they don't feel threatened in their brain that they need space. And so for me, I adapted for that to make sure that I'm a better partner for whoever I'm dating. Also, even in relationships, like my best friend, he's super needy. He's needier than anyone I've ever dated. And so like, I know, and I also know his childhood was a little rough. And so I'm like, okay, so I know, like, I got to have a phone call with this guy every week, because otherwise he's going to think like I've left him in a weird way, where my other friends, like we talk every 2 months or just text once in a while. We're good, And so like, it's a good way to just adapt to those relationships, or with your parents too, it's just a good way to, I mean, you're not gonna be able to change your parents. Your parents are your parents. A lot of times I get asked like, oh, should I have this conversation with my parent because he didn't do this or that? Like, you can have it, but don't expect them to change unless they're actively going to therapy to change that, because, they thought they were doing the best that they could at that moment most times, but we all make mistakes as parents. And so it's really just kind of a learning to, so this really just helps you with improving your relationships with other people, whether it's your wife, your father-in-law. It's just learning to adapt. And I use it in everyday life. I especially use it in dating, but it just helps me. For me in the dating world, it helps me speed the process up. And so because I do this so often, I can be like, okay, I can tell she's anxious or avoidant. Like, is this something that I want to invest more time in, or not, and also, am I going to be beneficial to that person or not? And so that's kind of how I use it. To me, it just improves my overall life. It's a tool. I always tell people it's not going to like, your life's not going to be like amazing just because you know attachment styles, but it's a tool to improve your life in all aspects. And even in the entrepreneur business world too, you got to kind of learn how each person is. You can't really treat them all the same because everybody's a little bit different. And so that anxious person's going to want to always make sure that they impress you, to do the right thing and stuff like that.
Do you happen, Jason, to worry anytime? And this is just popping into my head right now while you're talking about this, because it seems like you will adapt your style of dating to the personality type or the attachment style that you've determined that person probably has. And I think that's smart. I've told my kids especially when they're in school, know your audience, right? If you're going to achieve, you better know your audience. But having said that, if your long-term goal of dating is to have a lifelong relationship, then somewhere along the lines, they're going to have to see your true colors. If you're not, you know what I'm saying? I may not be articulating this correctly,
no,
but I think you get
what
I'm
totally.
saying.
So with the anxious and avoidant person is a perfect example. They have this thing called an anxious avoidant trap. And that's where those two get together. They tend to flock to each other, partly because just half of the dating world over 30 is avoidant. So you're bound to date an avoidant or anxious person, but they are a bad mix for each other for the most part. Very chaotic. Usually it's a longer relationship, but it's a lot of back and forth. And I always tell my followers, on social media that as an anxious person, if you're going to want that relationship to work, you're going to have to give up some of the things you like. So you have to realize, is that something you're willing to give up? If that person says not going to therapy and trying to improve themselves. So yeah, you have definitely, you have to have, of course, your standards, your boundaries, and because you still want to be happy, right? You don't want to be in a miserable relationship. And that's one thing, boundaries is important for the attachment styles. Anxious people tend to not have boundaries because they're just like, just, you like me, it's awesome. We're going to do this forever, right? Even if you may not treat me so well. Where an avoidant they usually have extreme boundaries, and so they're very black and white. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, you definitely don't want to give up your happiness for the person. And I tell people a lot of times, like, yeah, if you're dating an avoidant and they're really high level on that spectrum, and they're not doing anything to improve that, like, you're not going to be happy. And so that's where you have to decide ultimately, like, is this worth it? Or how long can you stick around being miserable, right? And so, because there are better people.
Yeah, it sounds like what you do is perhaps wait for those people to come part way towards you as well. Because then you have a true give and take relationship and not just a one-sided, I'm going to be a chameleon for the other person.
Yeah, see,
right?
what led me to attachment styles, I always tell people, I'm not a therapist. Sometimes I get asked to be the therapist for them. And I'm like, no, I'm just someone who kind of fell into this and then really studied it a lot. And so that's been my focus for the last several years. And it came from a relationship with an avoidant woman. And I didn't know what that was at the time. I was just like, wow, this is not going well. Or why is this not going well? Or why when I try harder, because this was like someone I was planning on marrying, like, why is it when I try harder, it seems like she doesn't like me. She just dislikes me even more, you know? And so I'm like, this doesn't make sense because I didn't have that when I was married for 15 years. I was like, this is a totally different dynamic. And then I had talked to a therapist after the relationship ended, and we were supposed to go to therapy, and I ended up keeping an appointment. And so he goes, oh, it sounds like she's an avoidant attachment. I was like, what is that? And so he told me. I went home and I wrote it down real quick when I left, and then I went home and I studied for like 3 hours, got a couple books, and I was like, how do these people know my relationship so well? And that's where I kind of started with it. But because of that relationship, I've learned, like, okay, if I'm dating an avoidant, they probably need to be on the lower end of that avoidant level, and also be aware of it. Because that's the first thing that's really hard for an avoidant, is to be aware that, okay, maybe I'm not doing everything I could for this relationship, right? And so I know myself, if I date a woman who's, say, highly avoidant and they're not working on it, I'm like, I'm out. I'm not gonna give this a second date.
Yeah.
You know, where it's like, I don't mind if someone is highly anxious, because I'm like, that's fine. You know, they just want to be around me a lot more. I'm totally fine with that, you know? And so one, I don't want to waste their time, and I don't want to waste my time. So yeah, you definitely, you definitely have to gauge it for yourself.
Isn't it amazing how we all fall into these categories, and then you run into a professional that does it for a living and they kind of know you, and you're like, how in the hell is it's all historical data, right?
Yeah.
It's big data. And we fall in these categories, and there's always give and take. And as you said, there's always a spectrum between them, but there's characteristics unique of each of those categories. And I'm telling you right now, and this is a different podcast, of course, but I'm telling you right now that you're going to have the therapist is going to be an AI talking to you about what category you fall into, and here are the 14 most important things you must do. That's coming really quick if it's not here already.
Yeah, it's funny. Of course, I had that like wow moment. They know exactly my relationship, and I get that now too when I teach people. A lot of, like, my biggest audience is on TikTok, and they'll be like, "How did you know so much about this, about my life?" And I'm like, "We're really not that different. Like, yeah, everybody's unique, but like we fit into certain categories. We have certain patterns for our attachment style." And so, I always tell them, like, no, you can learn this too. Like, I'm not some guru. I'm just someone who studied that. And it's like, you can give it a couple hours, and you can figure people out a lot faster and save yourself time, or have better relationships, whoever you are in a relationship with.
Yeah.
Let's dive into that really quick, because I know that when we last spoke in person, you mentioned, you had done some stuff on TikTok with the relationship attachment styles, and then kind of taken a break, and then you came back and there was this immense amount of growth. Can you kind of walk us through, like, one, what that experience was like, and two, how you think technology going forward is really going to impact people when it comes to interpersonal relationships?
Yeah. So when I started the podcast, it was well, first I started just talking about it on Facebook. It was right in the beginning of COVID, the COVID lockdown. And so I started talking on there, and a lot of people seemed to like it. And so then I went on TikTok. I was like, I'm going to try this on TikTok. I'm bored, as we all were sitting there at home alone. And so I went on there, and I started talking about it, and it blew up really fast. And I was shocked, honestly. And of course, if you caught in early on TikTok, if you were consistent, you got a good audience real quick. And so I did. And like I said, they wanted more information. I'm like, I can't tell you everything about in one minute, right? And so, like I said, that's where the podcast developed. And I had a podcast before that, a totally different niche, and and I didn't really have any success with it. And so this one, I was like, well, let me at least put it out. I was like, I'm going to put out like 17 episodes, and I was going to I'm just going to break it down. So like one episode was attachment styles. One is anxious, one is, all that. And so I did that for like 17 episodes. And because I had a viral video at that point, it drew everybody to there, because that's the only place where I was promoting. It was on TikTok. But I was smart enough where I was like, wasn't selling the podcast. I was just promoting this information. And oh, by the way, I have a podcast now if you want more information on that. So, and yeah, within 4 months, my highest month, I had 40,000 downloads. and I was like blown away. And it was totally related to that that viral video. And then I had a friend who has a podcast, and she had me on, and it had an effect on her too. Unfortunately, I haven't had a viral video in a while, but it had that effect. And the attachment test I send people to mostly, which is Dr. Chris Fraley, I sent I sent everybody to him to do the test, and it ended up crashing their website. And so, it's just I had a really good month, but I had no plans after those 16 or 17 episodes. I was like, I'm going to put these out, and then I'm going to think about what I want to do with this podcast, because I was not expecting that success. But then COVID, before the vaccine, I had my aunt and uncle. My aunt had passed away in Texas, and from COVID, and then my uncle, her husband, had passed away a month later, and so I had to go with my mom. I had to go handle their estate and everything. So I was there for a couple months handling all that in the middle of COVID before the vaccine, and so I was dealing with that, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just put the podcast on the side. I was still doing TikToks once in a while from inside my uncle's shed. And so, but go through all his tools and everything. But so I kept putting it off, and then, but I was still doing TikTok, and then I ended up buying a house in between, doing an Airbnb. And so I got distracted with everything else, because this was more like fun.
So you did life.
Yeah. So then it was like people kept asking me, like, why did you stop doing the podcast? And so I was like, hey, let me start it up again. And so I started it up about a year ago. And I don't have that success. I have success, but I don't have that level anymore. Now I have to build back up. And so a lot of people are like, oh, that's crazy. You had all that success and you just pushed it aside, And I was like, well, I had some family issues to handle, And so now I'm slowly building it up. But, it was never about making money. Originally it was just like, let me just spread this word. Because my initial thought on attachment, I was like, why don't more people know about this? This helped me a lot. So I'm just going to spread the message. Yeah. And then, it ended up spreading way more than I had planned. And so, so I was like, that was my goal. Like, when I first started doing TikTok, the hashtag attachment style, it had like 2 million views, which was okay. But now it actually hit 1 billion, and I was like, I know I was part of that, because I was the only guy in the beginning talking strictly attachment styles. Now everybody and their mother is talking attachment styles, but I'm like, I don't care. I'm so proud that like more people know about it, because at least maybe it can help people out, I do get messages, people like, you taught me more than my 7 years of therapy. And I'm like, that's probably sad on your therapist, because I'm not that great. but
honestly, Jason, there's a lot of people out there that until and this could be the attachment styles or personality tests, or a lot of different things that people can kind of gauge after a period of time and look at some questionnaires and determine kind of a category they fall into, or maybe one of their significant others falls into. And until they do that, these people, in 100% of them, struggle with why their relationships don't work well. So, set all the success stuff or not success stuff aside. It is important. It's important stuff. It really is. And we have fun on this podcast. We talk about a million different things, but this is one of those subjects, learning about yourself amongst a myriad of circumstances and personality traits and your history and how to put that aside and move forward. And all those things we could talk about is something, if people jump onto that and start to understand themselves just a little bit and those around them, can have much better lives. And you don't know, it's the old pebble in the pond kind of thing, right? You don't know how many, ripples it takes to reach those people, but you started that ripple, and that's awesome.
Yeah, it feels good. And, like I said, the goal is really just to help as many people as possible. That's kind of became my thing. I had no plans on this. Like I said, my previous life was military, and then I always joke, kind of like went from war to love, but, and I don't think enough men kind of talk about the emotional stuff, we're taught to be tough and, we don't cry. I know.
What's emotion?
I was guilty of it too. My oldest daughter's like, I never saw you cry until you had to move away from us, and so, because of the military, but I was like, well, kids are going to make me cry, but I'm like, okay. I try to tell the men, like, hey, it's okay to have some emotions. Like, women like that too, like, yeah, you can still protect them and do that manly stuff, but it's like, it's okay to, shed a tear once in a while, or maybe watch a rom-com.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, Hollywood says, is that striking done? Yeah,
I think it's still going on. Actually, I think it just
the writer strike is finished, but the actor strike's still on. I live by Sony Studios, so I see them every day when I go to the gym. So yeah, I always drive just to see if I see a famous person, but So I saw Jack Black. That was it. But
so obviously, you had the demographic on TikTok, you have the demographic on social media. Do you think that there's like a difference in like maybe demographic interest when it comes to relationship attachments? So like, maybe the millennial versus the Zoomer versus Gen X versus a Boomer. Do you think there's a variance, or do you think it's kind of across the board?
I think overall everybody seems interested, but my demographic is like 90% women. Kind of going with the men don't like feelings part, and then I tend to get the 25 to like 45-year-olds for the most part. I mean, I think the younger generation is a little more in touch with their feelings more. I know there's a lot more mental illnesses too. So during the younger generation, so I know there's a lot more talk about it. Plus, social media, we see it all now, right? And so I think it's slowly gaining ground. Attachment style has been around for like 5 decades. It slowly grew from researching 2-year-olds in a room with their mom and a stranger and toys, and it slowly evolved, over time with like hundreds of studies. But so it's slowly growing, I feel like, and it's really kind of taken off the last probably 5 or 6 years thanks to social media. But it does tend to be more of the women that I think are paying attention than the men. But they're getting there. I think the younger men are probably a little bit more attuned to their emotions versus like Gen X and the boomers, and so we were kind of like taught to like, don't worry about those things.
Get up, rub some dirt into it.
Your feelings, punch yourself in the face. It'll feel better. Yeah, that's really, I think it'd obviously be a good thing. I mean, I from my experience, my father, I don't know what attachment style he was, but it probably wasn't a positive one. And, witnessing and watching him and how, my family engaged in certain things kind of taught me over time that wasn't really the best way to do things. It wasn't really beneficial for anyone. There was a lot of wasted energy, a lot of just kind of pointless chaos for no reason. So I think that's probably where I kind of maybe pushed away from that. But when it comes to, younger generations, do you think that something like TikTok and Instagram and maybe Facebook and whatever's next, do you think those are specifically going to play a larger part in maybe, I don't want to say self-diagnosing, but maybe self-realization when it comes to something like attachment styles? And
they're definitely more aware because of social media. I think, social media, there's good and bad to all of it, of course. They are, you said self-diagnosis. So like, self-diagnosis does happen also too. I think the word narcissist is one of those words that everybody's ex seems to be a narcissist, like sometimes it's just weren't a good fit, but I think, the younger generation is more self-aware, and part of it is because social media, you don't have to go to the library to learn about something anymore. You can just put the phone up, of course there's always the dangers because sometimes that information is not correct, and that's, I think, because honestly, as I teach it, like I said, on TikTok, like I'm not a therapist, but I always point that out. Like I might get something wrong once in a while, but that's okay. Tell me if you got it. But also there are therapists on there who also teach too, that are, my peers or at least friends in that world. But, so it's like, you definitely, I always tell people, do your own research too. It's like, learn from me, but also go on YouTube or whatever. Like there's therapists on there, learn from them. I mean, you're going to be attracted to somebody's personality. And, I always say get multiple sources because you want to make sure that it's right. Do your own research basically, when it especially comes to your mental health. But definitely, my goal is to get people to have better relationships, go to therapy. I'm always promoting therapy. And then like you were talking about your father, breaking that chain, because there's always that generational, trauma. And so it's like, because, if you have kids, like you don't want to pass it on to your kid, it's unfortunate because we're going to pass some stuff here and there, I know things my parents pass on, even though I had pretty good parents, but oh, okay, I see that anxiety where that comes from. It's from my mom, clearly, And so, but it's like, okay, now I want to make sure that I try not to pass that on to my kids and not worry about every little thing that known to man, and my children. So it's like, let them go be adults and do their thing. But I'm there for them whenever they need me.
Interestingly, there's the old saying, you either become like your parent or directly opposite of that, right? That's kind of the mainstay thinking. And I think I've watched it happen to a lot of different people. But one of the things I think in it's not lost in what you're saying at all is that the social media platforms provide an odd, secure place for people that didn't understand what they were going through. And what I mean by that, Cam, you mentioned or well, excuse me. No, I said your real
They know my
name.
name.
Damn it.
They know who I am.
In any event, you're talking a little bit about your relationship with your dad, and most people may recognize that there's something wrong, but also normalize it because they don't have a view of anything else, and they think they're alone in it. And then you jump on a social media platform, and there's something like what you're talking about, Jason, and suddenly you realize, oh, I not only am I not alone, but there are thousands and thousands of people that are going through the exact same things that I can learn from and grow from. And that's hugely important.
I agree with that. So I have 4 children, and 3 of them are part of the LGBTQ plus community. So like they can reach out to people in their community a lot quicker, across the world versus like trying to find somebody who say they live in a place that's not so friendly to their environment. And so, yes, I feel like that it definitely, you find your niche, you find your people, that's what I found with social media. Cause even though I teach relationship stuff on there, I have other things that interest, but it's like you find your community. And so, yeah, I think that's what I appreciate about all this technology that we didn't have as kids, that slowly we're getting a lot of that.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel the same way. I mean, obviously, my wife, Jen Beowulf, and we were kind of on the last cusp of that. So we've talked about in other episodes how, we experience life before social media and before like it was, constant entertainment, like go outside and, go hurt yourself by falling out of a tree type thing. And now obviously being in between, I'm kind of seeing some of the dynamics of, something like, relationship attachments online where people are finding resources that are helpful to them. And then other resources online like Andrew Tate, where he'll say one decent thing out of a million bad things. And everyone's like, yes, so it's like, it's like, dude, there's a lot of bad stuff he said, but you listen to the one thing. So it's just very interesting to me. And it always fascinates at least me. And I'm sure probably fascinates the bull. I'm not going to speak for you. But it at least fascinates me how polarized some of these things become, and especially when it comes to maybe a self-diagnosis aspect of just generalized problems in your own life.
What fascinates me about what you just said there, Wolf, is that people will take, and I'm like this too. I'll read something or I'll watch a video or whatever, and if I watch a 3-hour YouTube video on something that I like, scientific or something like that, and I pull a few nuggets out of that either pertain to something I'm interested in or gain further knowledge of something, all those things are terrific. I love that. And I can personally, because of my upbringing, perhaps because of my age, generation, all kinds of things we probably include in this, I can segregate those things. I can segregate it from the person that is disseminating that information. But your point you made about this Tate person, and I don't, here's how I am. I'm old, so I don't even know who you're talking about. But he's
in your group. He's got a shiny head as well.
Oh, come on.
That's the only. It's good. I was talking to Beowulf about how like now you just look way more distinguished than before. I'm just saying.
Distinguished.
This is very much a compliment.
My dad would tell you, hey, this is what he used to say when I was a kid when he started thinning. He'd go, oh, yeah, I got room for hair or brains. It just, pushes the hair out just like that. So that's kind of my line now. This is decided, though, remember. I did this on purpose. Yeah. And, of course, when I tried to start growing it back, my kids said, don't do it, Dad. Don't do it. You look much better this way. You look tougher. So I got to stick with it. But my whole point is that a lot of people swallow the hook whole with these online personalities and everything. And that's the mistake that I see. Life is too complicated to just glom on to somebody that has millions and millions of TikTok views with everything they freaking say when they've said 3 things out of the 103 that were really pertinent to your life. Just hold on to those 3. You can give the person credit, but you don't have to believe that person is up on some pedestal. And that's the challenge I see with a lot of this.
Just separation, compartmentalizing. You criticize the bad, you applaud the good, and everything in between. You
sound too logical. Determined. That's the problem. You're too logical.
Oh, what can I say? I'm a secure attachment style. But, Jason, just to wrap up, is there any advice that you can give our listeners who may have been in relationships that feature, I don't want to say negative, but maybe the non-secure attachment styles?
Just learn from, once you learn to attach, first of all, learn your own attachment style, figure out what it is by just going online, getting an attachment test, and take that. It takes like 10 minutes. Then you can kind of learn your attachment style, and you can kind of look back and see, okay, I see why this happened, or why this person did this, or what I did that created this effect. Because, we, no matter what, even secure people, we do things that are not necessarily great. And so it's really about learning from that once you have knowledge of your attachment style, I always tell people learn it first, learn the other ones after, and then you can kind of learn from your experiences. And you're like, oh, so I see that pattern I keep getting into because I'm anxious and I keep doing this. And going forward, now let me try to use those skills to not do that for the next person. Because I always tell people, you might have the great partner right now, but if you're not really dealing with your attachment style and learning from that, that person might go away. You might miss out that opportunity of a great person. So like start today. Even if it's just like learning. We all have patterns that we're going to do within our attachment style, but really once you learn the basics of it, then see what you specifically do to, not to create an issue. So, because even like the anxious people, a lot of times avoidants get a lot of the hate because it's very abrasive with their personality. The anxious person tends to be trying a lot, but it doesn't mean that anxious person doesn't have faults too, because they can manipulate, as a technique to get the partner to come back to them. And so you have to, I remember my ex-girlfriend, the avoidant one, she said, I see you use manipulation when we're fighting about such and such. And I don't remember the exact thing I did, but later on I was like, oh, you know what? She was right. I actually, when I became super anxious, with our avoidant anxious kind of relationship and that, because I went from secure to anxious during that relationship, but I was like, oh, I started becoming more anxious. I started doing more anxious things. Manipulation is one of those. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize I even did that, even though it was not something extreme, but it was still a subtle thing enough to be like, she didn't like that, And so then you're like, okay, I remember that for the next person, that came. So I'm like, okay, because I found myself with the next person was an anxious woman. And I'd be like, oh, no, I can't do that because I realized that could be a minor form of manipulation. Like, I don't want to do that to that person. So it's really about learning from that with your attachment style so that you don't do it. And then you're still going to have arguments, but you're going to minimize those arguments, and you're going to, instead of going to bed angry, you might be able to resolve it quicker. And also just recognize your own faults. Like I said, we might be secure, but we can talk to our exes and they're sure going to tell us what we did wrong.
Awareness.
And so, I'm more aware of it now.
Yeah, well, and that's really good advice. I've always found that when it comes to any disagreements that I have with Jen, aka Beowulf, I've always found that the thing that I would feel really, really good in the moment to do is normally not the best possible thing. So it's always better to just be like, you know what, maybe that shouldn't be said. Maybe I should take a breather and work it out and talk it out. And thing that even though my dad and I don't have the best relationship, one thing he did tell me that was genuinely wisdom is never go to bed angry. Just doesn't benefit anyone. It's just not worth it. It's better to swallow your pride, even if in that moment you think you might be right, or even factually, even if you are right, like myself all the time, 99.997% of the time. So I think that's really good advice from
what's the old saying? It's better to understand than be understood.
Yeah,
sometimes, and that's a big thing. And I think one of the biggest flaws we all have is that we don't look in the mirror enough. Right. And we don't examine, and we don't usually examine who we really are, because we don't really know. And back to Jason's point, to take the test, to get online, to go on the app if you're dating or want to be be the wingman or wing team for somebody, it's kind of an interesting kind of direction to move relationships in. And having a filter on that, either in your own brain or on the platform or whatever, that says these are the personalities I know that I enjoy being with, and this is my personality, kind of winnows the field and does what all dating apps should, and that's try to create good, long-lasting relationships out of them.
Don't listen to Hollywood. The relationships, all of them are manipulative, and all of them are.
It's very challenging here in the dating world. I'm learning the hard way. Very challenging. It's a different world.
It is rough out there. Yes, it is. But Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciated the discussion. Honestly, some interesting insight when it comes to relationship attachments. I come from, not obviously, some may not know, I come from an area where I've read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I think it's Florence Littauer,
Personality Plus,
stuff, and then it has created the perfect level of data that I could use to get exactly what I want.
Nice.
in every relationship. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. It was a really good conversation. Now, on the note of the app you're working with and your social media, where can our listeners, what's the best place for them to find you, and what is the best way that they can support you? And
so we have the podcast Relationships and Relationshits. It's on all the major things. Blinda is the app, and it's not live right now, but you can download it. We're still in that growth phase. We're early on, so excuse our really it's good. Not perfect yet. I'm a perfectionist, but we're getting there. So, but you can get on it. And then on social media,
cool.
I'm most times like TikTok and YouTube. I'm known as Relationship Attachments. That's how it started, and I don't want to change it. And then Instagram relationship_attachments. So, but I'm most active probably on TikTok. I'm a TikTok addict, I'll admit it. But and so that's where I do most of my stuff. The other stuff I'm like, well, I probably should post here too. So yeah, that's where my crowd tends to be, and so that's where I am.
Yeah, well, we'll make sure to link all that in the description of this episode. We'll also have it pop up on the screen. We have technology. We have technology to do stuff. We have technology. But yeah, for our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to subscribe to The Wolf and Bull for more stimulating conversations, and don't forget to check out Jason Green's content on TikTok, on if he has any on YouTube, and don't forget to check out Blinda app. It sounds really, really good, and honestly, I really hope it changes the dating field, I guess. Because it is bleak in some areas out there. But yeah, check out his podcast, and we will catch you next week.